20 years, no one knew. Not Hollywood, not the press, not even his closest friends. The bag Marlon Brando carried with him as he stepped out of his limousine on Oscar night in 1973 remained a secret until 1993. What was in that bag? Why did his driver tell the police that night that Mr. Brando had a special situation? And why, after that heart surgery at UCLA Medical Center, did Brando make his first mysterious statement to a reporter? Sometimes what you give comes back to you 20 years later. The answer lay in a 5-minute moment on 5th Street on that cold March night in 1973. Brando approached a homeless veteran, spoke to him, and left an envelope. Inside was $50,000 and a note, "You deserve this. Never give up." The veteran cried when he opened the envelope. 20 years later, he still kept that envelope, but now it was in the office of one of UCLA's top cardiologists. And on the day Brando's heart stopped, he would remember that note and say, "I never gave up either." If you're curious about Hollywood's hidden stories of humanity and moments of true heroism, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story explains how an Oscar night saved a life 20 years later. Tuesday night, March 27, 1973. The 45th Academy Awards at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion would be remembered for a historic scandal. Marlon Brando was the favorite to win Best Actor for his role as Don Vito Corleone in The Godfather, and indeed he did. But when the envelope was opened, it wasn't Brando who took the stage, but a young woman in traditional Apache attire, Sacheen Littlefeather. As shock, silence, and boos filled the room, Sacheen read Brando's message. He was protesting Hollywood's portrayal of Native American people and therefore would not accept the Oscar. While the world talked about this courage, no one knew exactly where Brando was that night. The official statement was that he was at home, but the truth was much more complicated. Brando was actually not far from the ceremony. He was in a small hotel in downtown Los Angeles, watching the ceremony on television. He would refuse his Oscar because he believed in his cause, but not attending the ceremony would not cost him his appearance fee. Paramount Pictures and the Oscar committee had agreed to pay Brando $50,000 to appear at the ceremony. Brando did not attend the ceremony, but the money had to be paid according to the contract because his refusal was a political choice, not a professional lapse. That money was in Brando's bag, in cash. By the time the ceremony ended, it was past 11 p.m., and Brando got into his limousine. He didn't tell his driver, "Take me home." He said, "Cruise around." Maybe he didn't even know the reason himself, but there was a restlessness inside him. The limousine drove through the streets of downtown Los Angeles. Los Angeles in 1973 was not as glamorous as it is today, especially around 5th Street in San Pedro, which was an area of homeless people, veterans, and people forgotten by society. The Vietnam War was not yet over, and thousands of young men were returning from the war but receiving no support. PTSD wasn't even a recognized illness yet. Veterans were turning to alcohol, drugs, or the streets. As Brando looked out the window, he saw someone, a man in an army jacket sitting on the ground, trying to sleep on a cardboard box. The badges on the Vietnam veteran's jacket were still visible, but his face was tired, his hands trembling. Brando said, "Stop," to his driver. The driver was surprised and warned, "Mr. Brando, this isn't safe." But Brando had already opened the door. Brando got out of the limousine and stepped into the cold night air. He was still wearing his tuxedo, the outfit he had worn to the ceremony, but no one on the street recognized him. He approached the veteran, crouched down beside him, and said, "Hello, The veteran opened his eyes, looked at him in surprise, and asked, "You're Marlon Brando, aren't you?" Brando smiled and said, "Yes, I'm Marlon. What's your name?" The man's name was David. He was 28 years old, and he had served 2 tours in Vietnam. When he returned home, his family didn't recognize him. He lost his job, and no one cared that he was a veteran. "Everyone wants to forget the war," David said, "and I've been forgotten." Brando looked at him and saw something. His own pain, his own loneliness, his own rejection. "Your war is much more important than my Oscar," Brando said. David didn't understand what he meant. Brando opened his bag and took out an envelope. Inside was $50,000 in cash, his appearance fee for that night, the money paid for the most prestigious award on Hollywood's biggest night. He placed the envelope in David's hand and said, "Take this. This shouldn't be mine. It should be yours." David opened the envelope, saw the money, and froze. "Is this a joke?" he asked, his voice trembling. "No," said Brando. "It's a debt. This country owes you. I owe you. You fought. I just acted. Don't forget the difference." Brando stood up, touched David's shoulder, and returned to the limousine. David shouted after him, "Why?" Brando stopped, turned, and said one last thing. "Because you deserve it, and never give up." The limousine disappeared into the darkness. David sat on the ground, holding the envelope, and cried. The next morning, when David opened the envelope, there was not only money inside, there was also a small note. In Brando's handwriting, "Use this money for yourself. Go to school, get treatment, live. Remember, you're not a hero, you're a human being, and every human being deserves a second chance." David would carry that note with him for 20 years. The first thing he did was go to a motel and take his first hot shower in months. Then he went to a hospital and began treatment for PTSD. When the therapist heard David's story, he cried. Both the war trauma and Brando's gesture had deeply moved him. "This money is just a start," the therapist said. "The rest is up to you." David made up his mind. He would study medicine. By the end of 1974, David enrolled at Los Angeles City College. He didn't even have a high school diploma, but he passed the GED exam and started an associate's degree program. Money was no object because Brando's $50,000 covered tuition, living, and medical expenses. But his real motivation wasn't money. It was Brando's final words, "Never give up." David was 10 years older than his classmates, the only veteran in the class, and woke up at night with nightmares. But he persevered. In 1978, he transferred to UCLA, applied to medical school, and was accepted. At his interview, they asked, "Why do you want to be a doctor?" David's answer was simple. "Because someone gave me a second chance. I want to give it to others." Medical school wasn't easy. David was in his 30s and older than most of his peers, but he had experience. He had seen a lot in Vietnam, wounded soldiers, blood, death, and it had made him strong. He chose cardiology because the heart seemed symbolic to him. The center of life, constantly working, but fragile. He graduated in 1984, became a cardiologist in 1987, and joined the staff at UCLA Medical Center in 1990. Now, Dr. David Miller was one of Los Angeles' most respected cardiologists. In his office, there was a frame. Inside, it was the note Brando had written that night. He had never told anyone that story because he didn't want to use Brando's name. It was his success, but at its core was Brando's belief. February 1993, Los Angeles was cold. Marlon Brando was 69 years old, and his health problems were increasing. He had been battling obesity for years, had diabetes, and was beginning to have heart problems. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, he felt a sudden pain in his chest at home, numbness in his left arm, shortness of breath, classic heart attack symptoms. His assistant called 911, and an ambulance took Brando to UCLA Medical Center. He was stabilized in the emergency room, but the situation was serious. He was having a massive myocardial infarction and needed urgent intervention. The on-call cardiologist was called. The name on duty that night, Dr. David Miller. When David arrived at the hospital, he picked up Brando's file, and his heart skipped a beat when he saw the name, Marlon Brando. The name he had tried to forget for 20 years was now lying on the operating table. File in hand, 1,000 memories in his mind, David walked into the operating room. Brando was conscious, sedated, but his eyes were open. David put on the mask, leaned in and said, "Mr. Brando, I'm Dr. Miller. I'm going to take care of you." Brando looked at him, noticed something in his eyes, something familiar. "Do I know you?" Brando whispered. David hesitated, then said, "Maybe, but now is not the time to talk. I need to save you." The surgery lasted 4 hours. David used all his knowledge, all his experience. He placed stents, opened the blocked arteries, and got Brando's heart beating regularly again. The operation was a success. Brando spent 3 days in intensive care, then was moved to a regular room. David checked on him every day, but never mentioned that night, until Brando asked him directly. On the 5th day, when David came for his room check, Brando asked, "Dr. Miller, where do I know you from?" After a long silence, David replied, "March 1973, 5th Street. It was Oscar night and I was on the street." Brando's eyes widened, his memory came back, and he said, You're that veteran?" David nodded. Brando's eyes filled with tears. "What did you do with the money?" he asked. David smiled and said, "I finished medical school, I became a cardiologist, and now I saved your life." Brando couldn't hold back his tears. The money he had given 20 years ago had raised the man who now saved his own life. David continued, "Do you remember the last thing you said to me that night? You said, 'Never give up,' and I didn't. Every time I struggled, every time I wanted to give up, I took out that note and read it. You didn't just give me money, Mr. Brando. You gave me a purpose." Brando couldn't speak, only nodded. David took something out of his bag, that framed note. "I always carry this with me," he said. "It's in my office, but I brought it today because I wanted to show you something. Everything you give comes back. Maybe 20 years later, maybe in a different way, but it comes back." Before leaving the hospital, Brando wrote David a long letter. David never published that letter, but he told his friends its contents. Brando had written, "I've played thousands of people in my life, but you're the only one who truly affected me. Oscars, fame, money, none of that compares to you. You were my greatest performance, but it wasn't acting, it was humanity. Thank you, not just for saving my life, but for reminding me of the meaning of life." David framed that letter and hung it in his office, along with Brando's note. 2 documents, 1 story, a chance given in 1973, a debt repaid in 1993. Brando died in 2004, but his relationship with David never ended. For Brando's last 11 years, David was his personal cardiologist and performed regular checkups. A friendship developed between them, beyond patient and doctor, a bond between 2 lifesavers. Brando often said, "I saved your life, you saved mine, now we're together." In 2008, David launched a scholarship program at UCLA. a full medical education scholarship for veteran students. They named it the Brando Miller Veteran Medical Scholarship. 5 veterans received scholarships in the first year, and today more than 30 doctors have graduated from the program. When David retired, he gave an interview and spoke about that night for the first time. Marlon Brando was an actor to everyone, he said, but to me, he was a lifesaver. When he gave me money that night, he actually gave me faith that I could do something too, and that faith brought me here. The interview went viral, millions watched it, and Brando's story was finally revealed to the world. People rediscovered Brando, not just as an actor, but as a quiet philanthropist. David added, "No one knew because Brando wanted it that way. He didn't show off, he didn't chase cameras. He just did the right thing. And every day, as I look at each patient, I remember his lesson. Never give up." Today, there is a small plaque in the cardiology department at UCLA Medical Center. It reads, "Sometimes a gesture changes a generation. In memory of Marlon Brando and Dr. David Miller, 1973-2004. The young doctors standing beneath that plaque know the story. Those 2 frames in David's office, Brando's 1973 note and the 2004 letter, are still there, still inspiring. And every year, the Brando Miller Scholarship gives a new veteran a chance. The cycle continues. What Marlon Brando did that night wasn't just giving $50,000. It was valuing a person, touching a life, making a future possible. David Miller spent that money, but Brando's message remained, never give up, and David didn't. 20 years later, that message was in the hands that brought Brando's heart back to life. This wasn't just repayment. It was the universe's justice. What you give comes back to you, maybe years later, maybe when you least expect it, but it comes back. Perhaps the real lesson is this. Oscars are forgotten, films grow old, fame fades. But touching a person lives forever. Brando left the world hundreds of characters, but his true legacy is the note in the envelope he gave to a veteran that March night. "You deserve this. Never give up." 2 sentences, 1 life, an eternal impact.